Hi, I'm Aaron Pancake. I'm a 7th grader at Davis Middle School. This year, I've done a short space battle animation. The programs I used were Cinema 4D, which is a 3D motion graphics tool, Adobe After Effects, which is a compositing tool, and Premiere Pro, which is a editing and audio tool. I am very proud of what I've done this year, and I hope you like it too.
Red leader to the base. I'm almost to a jaw. Alright, report back if anything goes south. 2 Star Destroyers, it's a blockade! TIE fighters on my radar. I'm gonna have to fire them off. Send in the rest of the fleet. I'm going in. We'll be with you, Red Leader.
So the first thing I did when creating this project was I started with a planet. Now this planet is made up of 3 different layers. You got the base layer, the cloud layer, and then the atmosphere. So when you start with the base layer, it looks like this. I used computer generated noises for the texture to give me the difference between rock and lava and the rivers. I could also use these noises to get the reflection on the lava more reflective than the rock, and get some more rocky texture on the rock while the lava gets more lava watery texture. And another thing I use the noises for is I use the noise to displace the geometry, so it gets that mountainous geometry feel. Next, what I did was I created the clouds. For the clouds, I used a swirly noise and turned up the contrast on these. The blacks would be completely transparent while the whites would be somewhat opaque to get that really nice cloudy look. So for the finish, I put on the atmosphere. The atmosphere was made with a texture called Fresnel. Now Fresnel is, to explain it pretty basically, is so you have your camera position, and then what's kind of on the edge or facing away from your camera gets the highlight, while what's facing towards your camera, like the middle of this sphere, is getting shadow or non-highlight. So that gave me that kind of halo-y glow that the Earth and other planets have. So then I brought this planet into a Cinema 4D project along with multiple other models. So the X-Wing and TIE Fighter models I got off of Video Copilot. It's a free 3D model pack, and I can bring them into any 3D project. They're really, really good models. The Star Destroyers I created myself using box modeling. I looked at a bunch of Star Destroyer pictures as reference and modeled it the best I could. The X-Wing I have using position keyframes, so I can kind of set like, alright, I want this to be point A, and I want it to move to point D by this time, and rotate, and I can tell it to do different things like that. And that's how you keyframe, and it takes what's in the middle and it moves the object to that point. So I could use keyframe animation for the X-Wing, and it worked really well because there's one X-Wing. For the TIE Fighters though, there are 4 of them, right? Yeah, there are 4 TIE Fighters. And it would have been a lot harder to individually animate each TIE Fighter. So what I have happening is I have an animation type called Spline Animation. Spline Animation is pretty much what you do is you make a path. I created a path for this TIE Fighter to move along so it follows the path. And then I can set the rotation to however I want. And that's how I created the spline animation. It's a lot easier to duplicate because I can just duplicate this group that has this TIE fighter in it, and all I have to do is move the spline over on the second copy of it, and now I have two TIE fighters doing the animation. And I can mix up the rotation on it a bit to make it look like it's individual. So that's what I did on all the TIE fighters. You can see here, some of them have a little bit of a different animation, but they're all the same spline, which gives it a lot easier to duplicate. I could make hundreds of these pretty simply. The next thing that would have taken me a really long time to animate each individual object of would be the lasers. So you can see we start blasting off a bunch of lasers here, and look how many there are. It would have taken me a very long time just to individually animate lasers. So my solution was to create a particle simulation. So on each TIE fighter, I have a blaster, which is a particle simulation. So I set it to where it shoots out 2 particles per second, but the speed, it's moving at 1,000 centimeters per second. So it's moving really fast, like a bullet, giving us that really cool laser blast look. For the camera work, I used many different techniques. For the first shot, I used a stationary camera, but had a target on it to where I could set the X-wing to the target. And so when the X-wing comes in, the camera perfectly tracks with it. Now for this X-wing shot here, where it's on top of the X-wing, kind of like a GoPro shot, I put the camera inside of the X-wing to where the X-wing, it's using the X-wing animation. So it's pretty much parented to the X-wing. Now for this shot, I didn't use parent or I didn't use target. I have a pretty simple moving forward camera, and then I added a shake to it. Now shake was one of the more powerful tools, but a very simple tool to do. I just added it's called a wiggle expression. It just wiggles the camera on the rotation and just move the camera forward. It gives that really cool, intense feeling when you have that camera shake. This is the same thing here where I track the X-wing. Stationary camera with a little bit of shake. Here, I have the X-wing shaking, because when you have engines and stuff, you have that little bit of a shake. So I have that, and it blasts off. And here I have the same thing with the on top camera from the beginning. This. It's just, I put it backwards, or more on the back of the X-wing, and still it's inside the X-wing group, so it's taking the animation. For the explosions, I downloaded a free explosion called Midair Explosion from jangeffects.com. And I brought it into Cinema 4D and placed it where I wanted the TIE fighters to blow up, and I created my own texture for it. So I could set the emission to the temperature, and I could set each color to what I want. I could have made it blue, I could have made it red, I don't know. I didn't make it red. Then I rendered out different passes of the project so I could have more control in compositing. So let's go to After Effects to see my compositing. So for compositing, I used different tricks to make this short look much better. One of the tricks I used was using the emission pass I rendered out, which looks like this. And what I could do is add glows onto it. So without, it would be this. And I add that glow back on, and it just gives that little extra movie cinematic feel. On some instances, I would use stuff like lens flares. So we have this engine lens flare. I'm using a plugin called Optical Flares to create my flares. This one looks really nice. I thought it would work really well with this. You got these little flares. Also here, I have lots of emission pass on here, passes on here. One of the things that really looks a lot better after the emission pass is the lasers. So here's what they look like originally. And I had the emission pass on, and they look like Star Wars lasers. So this is what the emission pass looked like originally. I cut out the lasers so I could have my laser layer, and I wanted to just add a glow onto here, but it would still not have that white core that lightsabers have and the blasters have. So what I did is I added a tint onto it to tint the colors, added glow, and then my color vibrance. So really nice colors coming out of here. Now it looks like lasers. Alright, for this shot, I added different lens flares. So one of them, we have our optical glow on our emission pass to give us that extra glow. And then lens imperfections. So what I have here is I have stuff like this. Like the lens is a little bit dirty. Or back here, I have this and one down here. And it's very subtle, and especially when you watch it, but your brain notices it and it makes it look a lot more real and professional and cinematic. So the next thing I did was the explosion shot, to where all the TIE fighters explode. So one thing I did here is what I forgot to do in Cinema 4D is add a shake to when explosions go off. Because when explosions go off, it shakes things. It has that shock wave. So to add that shock wave, I had to do it in post, in compositing. So what I did is I cut it up into multiple different layers and added 4 different explosions. And I added a wiggle expression to the rotation, and that gives me that shaking effect. For the title, I did it fully in After Effects. It was pretty simple. Just had the mission title go back, and these titles just come up. Very simple animation, but looks really cool. And the last thing I want to talk about in compositing is this smoke here in this final shot. So I had to animate the smoke, give that bubbly look to it, and then just slowly fade it out. Kind of like that. You can see how it's kind of moving. So I have one that's more on the edges, that's a little rougher and more small bits, and one that's doing the full kind of waviness. And that's how I got that complex smoke look. And I think I did a pretty good job. Now the last thing that I did when creating this shot was creating this film, was adding color correction, grain, and a little bit of a flicker. So let's see what that looks like without it. So this is without any of the color correction or grain or flicker. So this is with the color correction. I think it looks really nice and looks more like a vintage original Star Wars film. The flicker you can kind of see in motion. It's very subtle. But when they were using film, they would have to take pictures, each part, and then have to show it through. And that gave it a little bit of a flicker. And then I added some grain, and it's much more visible in motion because you can see it moving. So then I rendered it out and went on to Premiere to do all the audio. So this is all the audio I used in the short film. So here I have my music tracks, which I fade between depending on the different parts of the film. Have the kind of upbeat mission-y type, and then we go into the fight and some more fighting. In the beginning I wanted to get that hard hit which kind of starts off Star Wars. So I have this bang on the beginning, which gives it that more hit when it begins. So over here I have my X-Wing tracks. So I have my start, and I did my voiceover, and then I got all the blaster sounds and just putting those where I think they go. That's about all I did for audio, just a lot of placing. So then I rendered it out here and I got my final effects. So that's how I did my short film. Thank you for watching. I hope you like it. Bye.